the unit on school standards and evaluation of NEPA. She has also been a faculty member of NIPSED and NCERT, and she has a wide experience of 30 years of teaching, research, and training in a number of premier national organizations. Professor Panda's field of specialization includes a broad spectrum of teacher education, school evaluation and leadership, school education, and teacher management and development, peace and human rights education. Professor Panda has not only served to the national level, but her accreditation to the international organizations is also remarkable. She has worked with various international organizations like UNICEF, UNESCO, World Bank, British Council, and United High Commission for Human Rights. Professor Panda has also worked for the National Program of School Standards and Evaluation, Shala Siddhi, a major initiative of Government of India. Professor Panda had done her PhD from Utkal University and her MPhil from University of Delhi. She has also done a course from IIEP Paris. She is the editorial member of international and national journals, and to her credit is the chapters included in the Encyclopedia by Oxford. I heartily welcome you, ma'am. Thank you for giving us your time. Ma'am, we'll be giving you an hour for our participants to enlighten us, and that would also include the discussion session. So over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are giving, how much time did you mention?
Ma'am, an hour.
No, fine. Yeah. Thank you so much, all the academia from Mata Sundari College. I could see Sanjay there. So it's a very, very good collaborative effort. And let me share some of my perspective on transforming teacher education through the lens of National Education Policy 2020. And your topic is teacher teaching and teacher education, and you wanted to evolve a very, very intricate perspective about teacher teaching and teacher education. And within that perspective, if you look at in the Indian situation, how we look at the identity of the teacher, I think the very ideal identity of teachers, that is guru, is still continuing in our vocabulary, in our mind, in our thinking. And somehow we understand that teacher is the change maker. Similarly, new education policy, continuing with the previous education policies, commission and committees, mentioned the similar kind of concept about the teachers, that teachers are the change makers. So they have placed the centrality, or we can say the centrality of the teachers is echoed in this new education policy. And this statement is a reiteration of the previous policy commission and committees. But when we look further, there are three perspectives coming, whether these are very new concept to us or it is within the continuity framework, we need to look at it. When we looked at the very notion of teacher, identity of teacher, pronouncing the centrality of teacher, it is a continuum with our previous pronouncement. And similarly, the teaching learning process, expressing the flexibility, experiential learning, child-centeredness, I think we are reiterating again on teacher education, very significant position. And 86 policy had also talked about teacher education as a continuum. In the similar way, this new education policy is looking at the life cycle approach from the entry of a teacher, the kind of student we need to recruit to the teacher education program, to the recruitment, deployment, service condition, career progression, and so on and so forth. And this document has placed teacher education or teacher and teacher education in three places, giving significant space to the teacher, approaches to teacher education, and also teacher education sector just after the higher education. So when we look at the new education policy and link our deliberations with teacher, teaching and teacher education, what kind of transformative agenda we have in front of us, which can really facilitate to change our teacher education, which is basically criticism loaded. If you look at, I was just calculating, there are nearly 66 documents since independence to pronounce about the teacher education. And I need to look at the kind of thread from the historical perspective we are still continuing. So my whole analysis is based on the continuity and change framework through the policies lenses with special focus on NEP. So when we are looking at the teacher education sector, one thing is really, I think you have many sessions on teacher education. They are equating conceptually teacher training with teacher education. So within the continuity and change framework, that the vocabulary of training is continuing to somehow dismantling the overarching holistic concept of the teacher education sector. So training versus education, we need to focus on that. And some of the content, when I was analyzing the continuity framework, I think teacher education is overloaded with criticism. People are not happy the way we are managing the teacher education, not for a decade or so. For last, say, more than 7 decades, teacher education is always under the mode of criticism. And always our efforts are to overcome those criticism or to rectify something, not emphasizing on the overarching development of the teacher education. So what policy has accepted about the teacher education institution and courses, we need to focus about that. Before that, we need to look at. So if you look at, there are few sentences written about the teacher education. Very critical. We need to really analyze all this. A strong regulatory effort to curb the malpractices. That means teacher education has a very significant component of doing malpractices. Of what nature, what characteristics, we don't know, but it is mentioned in the new education policy. We need to put our effort to stop the malpractices. And second one, it is talking about to enhance the basic standards of teacher education. So what kind of standards we are expecting to transform teacher education? And third point, which is also a bit negative in its perspective, that is restoring the integrity of teacher education. So there are two words which are uh, creating bit confusion amongst what is that malpractices and integrity of teacher education, and stringent action will be taken against some kind of teacher education, substandard teacher education. So when we look at the teacher education sector with entirety, some concept of criticism is really pushing us back to analyze in much more in-depth manner than in a very superficial nature. So if you look at this kind of policy pronoun, I will not say policy statement, we could find in the new education policy 2020, and it is within the continuity framework after independence. We could find similar statement with Coterie Commission report, and also teacher education commission report, even Justice Verma's report. That means we are unable to shade all these negative critic vocabulary from the teacher education. This is the major challenge. So when I was looking at new NEP and linking with in a very retrospective manner, I could analyze that there is some kind of continuity in the teacher education deliberation, and some of these statements we don't have evidence-based researches, or we don't have anything. Possibly some are assumption-led, and some are very, very imprinted in our mind. We consider that there is something wrong in the teacher education. So managing a teacher education sector with this kind of situation is a major challenge, bigger challenge within the transformative agenda of new education policy. I would bring in a very, very holistic perspective, but I would focus. First point is, what is that conceptual framework this new education policy is placing before us in terms of teacher and teacher education? The way I had mentioned, they have talked about the life cycle. I have developed this terminology, that life cycle approach to teaching profession, possibly from 86 policy to 2020 as a continuum. It is focusing on life cycle approach. On the other hand, the teaching profession over this last 7 decades somehow not been addressed in a much more meaningful way. So to build up this concept in a very, very elaborate manner, in-depth manner, we need to really look at the teaching profession, linking to entry to teaching profession to the recruitment, development, service condition in a holistic perspective. So my argument is that if we are looking at the teaching profession, teacher and teacher education through life cycle approach, we need to have holistic perspective towards this sector. Like if you, the very fragmented kind of intervention, fragmented kind of understanding is not bringing a change in a teacher education sector. In the conceptual framework as well, from 86, I can divide the whole deliberation from post-independence period, that is 47 to 86, and 47 to 86, 86 to 2020, you could see the teacher education, some kind of changes, like in the conceptual change, what kind of changes we have inbuilt within. Till 1986, teacher education used to be managed by the state and considered as a teacher training program. I think training vocabulary we used to use for either early child preschool or elementary, secondary teacher training, keeping a very narrow perspective, and manage and the whole courses program used to be managed by the state government and respective university. But 86 gave a new momentum towards the teacher education. It brought a very, very significant paradigm shift in the teacher education concept as a continuum perspective, placing it within the framework of lifelong approach to teacher education. So I always look at, we transited from the very narrow perspective of training to teacher education with a very, very significant way in the post 86. And also we try to build that essence conceptually and structurally in our teacher education program. Huge transformation happened within the teacher education, transforming from a provider of pre-service to provider of in-service with continuum. And we started nurturing some of the institution, and federal government started playing critical role in transforming teacher education. And similarly, we thought that we need to have a regulatory body. Teacher education was in mess before 86. And privatization, commercialization, this kind of terminology we used to use when we were deliberating on teacher education. Possibly we wanted a very strong regulatory framework to regulate the teacher education, to prepare a professionally competent teacher. In other language, this NEP has also mentioned that we have failed somehow in the regulation of teacher education, which I will be discussing thoroughly. So this 2020 NEP framework for teacher education somehow rooted to the 86 policy as a continuum. Some of the concepts are still continuing. So here we need to really reflect, explore, and question ourselves. How much changes we could manage in teacher education sector, and why we could not manage changes in teacher education. So this question equally puzzling us, and many have got strong assumption that because of privatization, because of a market model, because of neoliberal policy, possibly privatization is not allowing us to strengthen our image or transform our image of teacher education sector. But we don't have many evidence-based research to support that whether private institutions are the culprit or government institutions are showing some kind of exemplary innovative courses to transform teacher education. We need to critically deliberate on all these agenda. When I was linking the base of other policies and to the new education policy, I could analyze this transformation of teacher education from two perspectives. First one is transformation for teacher education and transformation within teacher education. How do we look at it? So transformation for teacher education, there are few recommendations or policy pronouncement placed under NEP. Number one is that it is talking about reflecting within the continuity framework that university-based teacher education could possibly transform teacher education. That means all our teacher education program should be within the broad framework of university. That means university is given huge emphasis to transform teacher education. We have many teacher education program within the central universities, within the state university, affiliating universities. So if this argument we are placing, university-based teacher education could bring quality teacher education, then it is unfolding many things. And the policy has also linked it to the multidisciplinary college and university. So a dependent concept has emerged. Universities have to change themselves to multidisciplinary so that university-based teacher education could be rooted within that. But when I was looking at whether teacher education itself is multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, our answer is yes. Our faculty are from different background. The teacher educator have got the specialized of foundational knowledge, subject knowledge, and equally pedagogically trained. So the very concept of multidisciplinary college and university, linking the multidisciplinary orientation of our institution or department we need to pronounce it with much more clarity. So the university-based teacher education further linked to the longer duration of teacher education. So another transformative agenda is that in a continuity framework, so this policy is talking nothing very new, but from 64, 66, the teacher education really necessitate a longer duration or longer period of engagement to prepare the professionally competent teacher. So in this way, they have talked about that we need to have all longer duration program within the university. But they have given 10 years time to institutionalize 4 years integrated program in all the universities. So within 10 years time, we need to transform ourselves to a university-based teacher education courses with longer duration, and this 1 year, 2 year possibly would we need to really look at them slowly, gradually we can overcome this type of courses. And another concept is that it should aim at housing outstanding education department. What is that nature, characteristics of outstanding education department to offer Bachelor of Education, Master of Education and Research? This is a very, very good point for us, the very transformative agenda for the university-based teacher education, providing a very overarching kind of concept. That means we will be preparing professionally trained teacher, professionally trained teacher educator. We will be also creating new knowledge through research in the university for the teacher education sector. I think this is the excellent concept built in within the new education policy. That's why from a very, very narrow perspective of teacher training, today I was going through one of the newspaper article. It is repeatedly training. It's so narrowly conceived. So training should be substituted substantially with education, giving a very holistic perspective to the university-based teacher education. The question here comes, how do we institutionalize it? Because there are 47 central university for the last 10 years or last 8 years. These new central universities, we have education, school of education, but they have very less human resources. They do not have many resources to really translate the teacher education courses, activities in a very true spirit or effective manner, one could look at it. The third point which we are talking about, the expanded role of the teacher education, school of education, department of education. That means now this new education policy is talking about pedagogic training for higher education faculty. That means irrespective of their discipline, this pedagogic training would be given to all the faculty, all the discipline people, including science, social science, multidisciplinary perspective, or all that, by the education department. So the very expanded role, critical role of teacher education, because all of you are more experienced working within the university setup, you would find teacher education is seen through a very suspicious manner. What are these people doing? What kind of discipline they are teaching? So this networking, integrating within the university culture, I think that is given more emphasis with the new education policy. So this kind of parameter are expected to transform transformation for teacher education. That means this initiative would be taken to change the teacher education. The point, another point, very critical point is the transforming National Council for Teacher Education. So you link it like conceptual transformation, the kind of deliverable model, regulatory model, all are intricately interrelated. That's why NCTE over the last 93 to 2020 was in a very controlling mode, controlling the teacher education institution. And if you look at the controlled model of NCTE, I have coined and shared in my consultative meet, over-regulated under governance. They evolved like that. And meanwhile, the expansion of privatization, many state governments, they have escaped themselves in opening new good teacher education institutions. So last 25 years, you will hardly find state agency to engage themselves in the expansion of teacher education. And the stringent regulatory model allowed this private to emerge, and they themselves are critical. So 27 years of existence of NCT giving rise to privatization, or we cannot blame NCT as a single agency not to allow transformation in teacher education, but there are multiple factors. But we need to look at the very transformative role of NCT in the current context. We are talking about the NCT as a standard setting body. I have already written paper on that. I was just looking at what kind of teachers education standards we need to pronounce for India. And do we really require a teacher education professional standard framework which would guide the teacher education to reach to that level? And when I was looking at the global scenario, they don't have a regulatory body like us. And the teacher professional standard, many a time the agencies, the standard setting agencies, they have evolved. Possibly NCT can play that role, but with huge transformation. NCT cannot give us that kind of outcome led by any bureaucrat and with a kind of administrative arrangement. No academic people are around there. It is only guided, through committees. I always say committees means we share our half brain or quarter brain in the committees. So we require a very strong institutional arrangement to evolve the teachers' standard framework and the very, very changing role of NCT as standard setting body. These are certain agenda placed for transformation for teacher education. That means if these things would change, teacher education would possibly change. So we need to emphasize on this 5 point or 6 point so that they would work towards teacher education. Then the next concept, which NEP 2020 is focusing a transformation within teacher education. So within the teacher education, when we are talking about transformation within the teacher education to prepare professionally trained teacher or to improve the quality of teacher education, courses, program, or sector, number one is that conceptual and foundational perspective to teacher education. We need to understand what knowledge, what foundational perspective teacher education should constitute. We have huge disagreement with this. And we have curriculum frameworks, which is talking about all those things. But conceptually, we are not clear what should be the knowledge base for the teacher education. The foundational perspective to teacher education program and courses. What could be the weightage? When I was looking at NEP, they are thinking the foundational perspective is the teacher education. That means if you give the weightage to foundational and pedagogic methodological, they have given huge emphasis on foundational knowledge coming from the other discipline like sociology, psychology, political science, economics, and so on and so forth. So as we belong to teacher education, we need to define the very contour of sociology of education. We are not teaching here sociology per se as a discipline, but we are extracting knowledge from sociology discipline, the very critical component which should be the foundational perspective of teacher education. I think we have a very, very knowledge deficit in this kind of deliberation and discourses. And further, if teacher education would be linked to the very multidisciplinary perspective, because I teach the very interdisciplinary nature of education. How do we define that? The multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity concept of the foundational perspective to teacher education, which is very, very critical. And we are not engaging ourselves to evolve this kind of concept. Why I'm sharing with this, some of the knowledge deficit is leading us to derive some ideas from assumption, and assumptions are leading towards quick fix approach. I hope all of you are getting me. So in-depth approach, in-depth understanding, very, very critical to teacher education sector. Second point is that curriculum and pedagogic practices. I think it is hugely emphasized in the new education policy. So the curriculum and pedagogic processes, if you look at, we till date after independence, we have poor curriculum framework, but till 86, states were developing their own teacher education curriculum framework without looking at other states or good practices. University is used to take the responsibility to do or develop their own teachers. So knowledge deficit used to play a huge role. But subsequently, if you look at 98 and 2009, 98 also could not make explicit change in the curriculum, but 2009 definitely, because we took a lot of initiative for strategic implementation. So developing a curriculum which is full of abstract concepts. And you would find that one side critiquing, one side recommending a huge responsibility is creating some kind of confusion amongst the teacher educator institution. So the curriculum 2009 has somehow created a movement across the institution and courses, universities, to change their teacher education curriculum program and courses. What I would say from my, as part of the joint review mission of Government of India, of many states for teacher education, my research and other things, we haven't achieved it more than 50%. That means we have succeeded in communicating some of the concept for the concept's sake, but not as part of the practices. So our movement should focus on not only have knowledge base, but should penetrate in the classroom practices, translate within the teacher education classroom practices. And further, when we look at the new curriculum of teacher education, which the NEP has mentioned about 2021, possibly would look at the multidisciplinary perspective. So there are two very, very strong points for teacher education. multidisciplinary perspective to teacher education curriculum, and multiple approaches for pedagogic practices, not recommending the pedagogic process, but exposing the prospective teacher with multiple pedagogic practices, and also supporting them to select the right one for the right concept. Possibly we do it at the teacher education level, but when they reach to the classroom, they are unable to translate some of the pedagogic practices in the right perspective. So these are the major agenda of change within the teacher education institution. Why I am highlighting this? Because always either we blame the system of governance or the regulatory body, less focus on the institutional practices and other things, right? So now we need to focus on the very critical role of the Department of Education, critical role of the institution offering different courses. So how do we do that? Bringing transformation or change within the institutional practices. The institutional practices somehow changing, but I would say not to a greater extent. How do you change the institutional practices, performance, and within the resource arrangement and within the available human resources? So the institutional performance is critical for transforming teacher education, which is highlighted in the NEP through the word like high quality department of education like this. We need to deconstruct that, decode the policy expectation. That means each department, institutions, they need to really play very, very critical role in transforming or preparing professionally competent teacher. So institutional performance, department performance with autonomy. When I'm adding the word autonomy means we should have our own voices to transform teacher education. All of you should agree with me. We know we teach certain concepts which are not really beneficial to our prospective teacher. So our voices are not the feeder to the curriculum transformation or curriculum change. I just want to cite one of our research study. We did it in a across many countries like USA, China, Finland, India, Korea, and we looked at how the teacher educator and teachers are voicing towards change in curriculum management. Possibly India, we take the voices, but their voices are very, very trivial in nature, or they don't understand in a very, very in-depth manner, or they are not empowered enough to raise the very professional kind of voices to transform curriculum and pedagogic practices. So the very empowerment of institution, empowerment of the department with autonomy, and bit of transformation of the contextualization of the curriculum within the department with the due approval of the university, discussion across the faculty of the university, possibly could shape the teacher education program, courses, and it can really overcome some kind of critic model which we have been encountering for the last 70 years. That is the major concern. I have been, talking in many, many webinars, but it is the huge expectation. But expectations are not analyzed in a much more critical so abstract notion, nature of expectation is not helping the teacher educator and teacher education institution per se. And further, each the Department of Education, School of Education, institution offering diverse courses should be outcome oriented. What kind of teacher we are really producing for our country, for our own state. So the outcome-based teacher education is the call of the day. That means it should be linked to our conceptual foundational perspective, built on the standard setting model with huge autonomy by the department and based on the outcome-oriented approach. When I'm talking about outcome-oriented approach, it is very much in the Finland. We talk about Finland. They look at the kind of teacher their universities are preparing and their the level of these prospective teachers, whether they are really fit to enter to the teaching profession of that country or not. We don't do that. And the second point is the teacher eligibility test, which is hugely mentioned in the new education policy. But each institution should have some kind of outcome oriented approach to prepare professionally trained teacher. And a lot of discussion we need to have on teacher eligibility test. When I was analyzing the teacher eligibility test, the whole curriculum, syllabi, the kind of books we have, the kind of engagement of teacher, and the kind of question we have, all are not matching. So if students are not performing well in TET, which is considered as the outcome of the teacher education institution, and performance of the teacher education institution departments are labeled accordingly, we need to look at who are the people making this teacher eligibility test and what kind of result we are getting. So when we place the whole analysis from transformation for teacher education, transformation within teacher education, we can place our ideas in this way. And further, I was just looking at one side, it is talking about the all teacher education program to be located within the university, multidisciplinary context, longer duration. But the teacher educator profile of teacher educator is quite silent about within the new education policy. What kind of changing perspective, identity of teacher educator, whether the identity of teacher educator would definitely change, whether we want disciplinary people to be within the teacher education department or school of education. So the very concept, when I was unfolding who is a teacher educator, the term is that I'm not linking it with a pedagogy or something. The term teacher educator commonly refer to both those who educate prospective teacher or educate practicing teacher. So anyone who is educating prospective teacher, whether they should have pedagogic orientation, they should not have pedagogic orientation, whether they should have MA qualification or PhD qualification, one has to really look at without the teacher educator, the they are the key agent to transform teacher education, and you can link it with the institutional performance. If teacher educators are not well prepared, well competent, possibly some of the transformation won't happen. Then the concept is that when we are talking about all these things, can this agenda bring transformation in teacher education? Whether these agendas are absolutely new or they are in continuum framework. Some of them are new, some of them are in continuum, but we could not manage change as per our expectation. We have changed because when the the very because of globalization, neoliberalism, or market demand, we have changed, but not as per our expectation. All documents relating to teacher education you would find full of expectation, but we could not reach to the fullest extent. So, who would take this responsibility to manage change? There are many institutions operating, national level, regulatory body, Ministry of Education. So, who is accountable to bring change? Or should we continue with the blame game model, which is continuing for the last 70 years? So these are certain questions, even I do not have answer, but I look forward that as we belong to teacher education, we should be the change agent. We should inform the Ministry of Education, we should inform the National Council of Teacher Education what exactly we know, what exactly we want to do. I think this transformation agenda should be bottom-up approach, and our voices should be linked to policy formulation, policy planning, policy implementation strategy. The prescription model should be, we can say, should be endowed with or supported with the voices of the teacher educator. Because if you look at the very identity of teacher, the very prescription for teaching learning process cannot happen unless and until we are preparing our teachers, prospective teacher within that framework. So when internationally, when we are talking about the operationalization of these complex policy initiatives, it's not a very, very easy task, but it's not impossible. But we consider the doing bit of tasks as a transformative agenda. It is, I always call it as a not bolt fixing. If one knot is loose, no. Teacher education doesn't require any kind of knot bolt fixing. Now it requires holistic perception, holistic deliberation. Whether you are talking about ICT, whether you are talking about curriculum, pedagogy, any kind of transformation, the holistic perspective should emerge and emerge from us, from the teacher educator. And further to link that whether we need a very, very homogeneous kind of teacher education or heterogeneous, we have the guideline for the courses, but in many countries in the world, there are different pathways for teacher preparation. And we require, I think, multiple pathways for teacher preparation because this is a bit of aspirational course for the many disadvantaged group. So the current diversified teacher education should create the access. For example, if we are bringing all university-based teacher education, and there is some kind of recommendation about the district as well, but this diversity of teacher education should not lead to disparity, or we should create access for more talented youth, what a new education policy has talked about, rural talented youth and disadvantaged category. So teacher or being a teacher or joining the teaching community is the aspiration of many, many. So we should not use many negative vocabulary about the teacher education, rather than our deliberation should be focused from the developmental perspective. How do we bring change within the teacher education? And I have been sharing in all platforms, we need to evolve teacher knowledge base for the teacher education. And renounce the transformative agenda, support the bureaucracy to bring desired changes in the teacher education sector. Thank you so much. So if any question or anything, we can address.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for enlightening us through this explanation about the teacher education. Well, you have very well developed the chronologically how we have come to this stage of teacher education. The question of teacher training versus education is something that absolutely one we need to reflect upon. And thank you for enlightening us how we need to reflect, explore, and question researches, what kind of teacher education model we need to have with the changing time. Thank you for enabling us to think over thought-provoking questions that you have left us to think over and to do more researches and work upon. It was really a very interesting and thought-provoking session. Uh, there are no as such questions from the participants right now. Any questions from the participants, they can put it in the chat box. We are through with the session.
यदि किसी का क्वेश्चन है तो हैंड रेज भी कर सकते हैं. हाँ, हैंड रेज कर लें और डायरेक्ट सवाल पूछ सकते हैं.
Ma'am, I don't think we have questions, but the kind of thoughts you have left us, we need to really reflect upon that. That's why we are not asking you, but seeking answers by ourselves would be more important, and how we need to contribute to have a.
Do you have time? Do you have time or you don't have time?
Ma'am, 2-3 minutes.
Okay. So some of you can raise because silence will not bring change in teacher education. Everybody should raise the question. The ideas we are trying to build up, whether it is the right way or we need to think much more in-depth manner. These are certain questions we need to raise. It may be, dealt in other session as well. I was looking at the whole timeline.
Ma'am, I myself want to ask a question.
Yes.
Now, in higher education institutions and also in the teacher education programs, we are looking at our students who are still undergrads taking up projects which are research based. So we are trying to do this collaboration between departments where students either in groups or they can in pairs or individually do some projects. And so now we see this as an opportunity to create interest in research also. But what is the way ahead? Suppose they do this research, what can be a platform where they can share it with the larger community, with the larger groups? How do you see it, ma'am?
Look, the project, as part of the teacher education courses, I think that this is your question. Yes. How do we engage our students so that they can understand the context, teaching learning process, and that would really help them to become an effective teacher, professionally trained teacher. So at the institutional level, you need to, there is a very continuum of the project activities historically. They would take up certain project, which you will not find any kind of usability after the program. So the department can play very, very critical role to look at the very granular concept of teaching, professional processes, context. It should not always be very big to know about it. and they can really discuss with different level of teachers, experienced teacher, what they are talking about, why they are talking about, how do they manage change. I think we need to really engage in small activities. I'm just telling you, we have one diploma in educational planning and administration, and many state level education official teacher educators, they join. They cannot write in English sometimes. But I always tell them, if you are working in a BRC or somehow, you raise some critical question. That means developing the capability to raise question and seeking answer is also a research.
Right.
So this kind of certain skill, developing skill, working on a small granular point and in a very collective way. We give marks on this, but collectively, few students can join, do it in a very group manner. There are many ways of doing and engaging our student for questioning, for engagement. I think that kind of thing is missing. And the culture of silence should be, curtailed. We should allow our student to speak, always speak. After the class, during project work. Uh, and we need to drag them from superficial nature of project to a very in-depth manner, be 10 pages, 5 pages. They should internalize it, what they have done.
Right, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, Dr. P. Venkateshwara Rao has an observation to share. He writes that
Yes,
teacher eligibility test is mandatory for teacher recruitment, but
yes.
some of the states is not following it.
But new education policy is making it mandatory for all categories of teachers, like secondary as well. So the point which it is going to be mandatory for all levels of teachers. So one has to really look at it. As teacher education people, we should not get trapped the kind of question they are asking in teacher eligibility test. When I was analyzing the teacher eligibility states of test of few states, it's really very, very disappointing. How do you really prepare the teacher eligibility test, linking it to the curriculum, because we don't have prescribed book for teacher education. Many state students, they read the local authors in vernacular languages, their local state languages. So the curriculum further placed in the textbook are of varied nature, and the teacher eligibility test really fails to measure their desired knowledge, skills, and competencies.
Ma'am, we'll take a one more question by chat. To provide easy higher education benefits to people from ST categories, mainly, who arrived of it in comparison to others.
Look, when I'm looking at the our indigenous people, the scheduled tribes, and they are considered as the disadvantaged community, we have constitutional provision. I'm just looking at the empowerment of the community, the disadvantaged community or civil tribe community is very much linked to their education and education development. And that's why the participation of these civil tribe children in school education, in higher education, very, very critical. And further to teacher education. Now this new education policy is talking about local specific teacher. If you are not encouraging the scheduled tribe, scheduled caste to join our teacher training program, teacher education program, possibly we will not have good number of teachers from the disadvantaged category. Why I'm placing 90% of the teacher education institutions are private without reservation policy. Can this disadvantaged category pay money for the teacher education courses? So entering them to the public funded institutions, higher education, coming for teacher education would definitely liberate them, liberate or support the whole community for their quality of life and development. It's very, very essential. That's a very, very good point to highlight. And teacher education should look at it, the disadvantaged category, because of the privatization. So 10% institutions have reservation policy. What about the 90% institutions? Are they following reservation policy? Are they getting free education like public funded teacher education institution? We need to look at all these things.
या आरती जी मैं आज मैम से बात कर सकता हूं?
हाँ संजय बोलो।
मैम दिक्कत एक दिक्कत थी मैम जो मुझे आपसे शेयर करना था वो ये एनईपी 2020 जो स्टैंड अलोन इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं तो वो उनकी बात नहीं कर रहा है, जबकि हम लोगों को ये शायद ये समझ बनी थी आफ्टर 12th प्लान कि हम लोग टीचर एजुकेशन यूनिवर्सिटीज एस्टेब्लिश करेंगे, और वो आइडिया बहुत बेहतर तरीके से निकाला गया था एमएचआरडी में, और इसमें शायद नीपा की बड़ी भूमिका रही थी कि एक डिसिप्लिन को इमर्ज करने के लिए टीचर एजुकेशन यूनिवर्सिटीज होनी चाहिए। और ये व्हेन वी एंटर्ड इन 2020 तो हम इस बात को पाते हैं कि शायद स्टैंड अलोन इंस्टीट्यूशन नहीं होने से वो फोकस नहीं रह पाएगा टीचर एजुकेशन पे, खासतौर पे रिसर्च एंड उस तरह की जो पेडागोगी भी जो हम काम करेंगे। तो मैम इसको आप कैसे?
जी नहीं, इसमें जो बात है ना, ये दे आर टॉकिंग अबाउट मल्टीडिसिप्लिनरिटी। तो यूनिवर्सिटी का नेचर भी बदलेगा, इंस्टीट्यूशन का नेचर बदलेगा। और एक सेकंड बात बोल रहे हैं, अभी जितने टीचर एजुकेशन इंस्टीट्यूशन है सेकेंडरी वाले, वो सारे एफिलिएटिंग मॉडल में बैठे, और न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी बोल रहा है ओवर ए पीरियड ऑफ टाइम वो एफिलिएशन भी खत्म हो जाएगा। तो क्या हम वो जितने यूनिवर्सिटी है, ज्यादा यूनिवर्सिटी खुलेगा, वो टीचर एजुकेशन यूनिवर्सिटी के नाम पे ना होके अदर यूनिवर्सिटी मल्टीडिसिप्लिनरी यूनिवर्सिटी होगा। मेरे जो कंसर्न है वो जो स्टैंड अलोन है, मोस्ट ऑफ देम आर आई वुड से 90% ऑफ देम आर इन प्राइवेट सेक्टर। So possibly if they have private universities within their campus, they can converge. But the question is that हमारा access कौन create करेगा टीचर एजुकेशन को? क्या ये सारे यूनिवर्सिटीज है, डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल में भी बोल रहे हैं, ऑटोनॉमस इंस्टीट्यूशंस बोल रहे हैं, तो ये एक्सेस तो काटिल नहीं होगा, तो हमारे टीचर डेफिसिट आगे जाके तो नहीं बढ़ेगा। और अभी एक सर ने क्वेश्चन पूछे थे कि क्या एसटी कम्युनिटी और एससी कम्युनिटी हायर एजुकेशन में आना है, और फर्दर में उसको लिंक करके टीचर एजुकेशन में मैं जब इक्विटी कॉन्सेप्ट देख रही थी, एससी एसटी रिजर्वेशन से आगे नहीं बढ़ रहे हैं। सो हाउ डू वी ब्रिंग एससी एसटी लोकल स्टूडेंट टू एनकरेज देम टू एंटर द टीचिंग प्रोफेशन? जो ये पॉलिसी बोल रहा है कि टैलेंटेड रूरल यूथ को लाओ, इंक्लूडिंग एससी एसटी को, तो आप एक्सेस नहीं क्रिएट करेंगे, आप प्राइवेटाइजेशन अभी जो खड़ा है ये पैसा नहीं दे पाएंगे, कहाँ से टीचर बनेंगे? और कितने लोगों का एक्सेस है जो आके यूनिवर्सिटी पब्लिक फंडेड इंस्टीट्यूशन में पढ़े? तो वो रिजर्वेशन जितने परसेंटेज है गवर्नमेंट का, उसके आगे बढ़ नहीं पा रहे हैं हम। सो ऐसे बच्चों को हम कैसे लाएं? और आपका क्वेश्चन सही है, टीचर एजुकेशन यूनिवर्सिटी, फिर उसका कॉन्सेप्ट को मल्टीडिसिप्लिनरी में कैसे लाएंगे? और अभी द करंट सिचुएशन वी हैव करंटली 4 यूनिवर्सिटीज, आई थिंक तमिलनाडु, कलकत्ता, गुजरात, all are in different nature. Some are doing B.Ed, M.Ed similar to any department of education. Tamil Nadu, they are in the affiliating model. And this West Bengal, they are offering MA in leadership education planning. So we had conceptualized, we had brought a very good document on teacher education university, and planning that each state would have one teacher education university. But I think it won't help us to escape from the affiliation, standalone concept, insularity concept. But दूसरा भी जो concept हमें दिया गया है वो भी इतना आसान नहीं है. उसको इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइज करना, डिकंस्ट्रक्ट करना, डिकोड करना, क्योंकि हमारे जो कंट्री में नेचर है एक इंस्टीट्यूशन बना के एक दो आदमी को बैठा दो और उनके ऊपर इतना बड़ा एक्सपेक्टेशन लाद दो, which is not true for teacher education. Teacher education is really encountering such type of difficulty. Okay, Sanjay. Sanjay.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Aarti, you want to say something? Please go ahead. Aarti,
कुछ है और क्लोज करना है.
Namita,
और आपने would ask any question?
Aarti ma'am, I'm asking, you want to say something or should I take over?
Yeah, you take over. You
Okay.
take over.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Aarti, for closing this session. Thank you so much, ma'am, once again from our side for giving a very enlightening lecture to us. And now I think the next speaker, Professor Namita Ranganathan from the Central Institute of Education has also joined us. The technical
So I would
team,
just take
Hello, Pranati. Hello, Pranati.
Hi, Namita.
I heard parts of your lecture. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, I came in.
No, I need to thank these people. I need to, they have placed all good people in the deliberation, and something concrete should come out, Namita.
Yeah.
So I must thank all everybody, organizer, Navneet, and Sanjay, everyone. So I should close it now.
Ma'am, I was Namita ma'am's scholar.
Okay.
So looking forward to her presentation.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye.
bye, ma'am. Radhika ma'am, are you also unmuted or should I request for it?
Yes, I'm unmuted, Ravneet.
Radhika also has to get unmuted. Dr. Radhika?
राधिका अपने आप को अनम्यूट कर लीजिए. राधिका को अनम्यूट कीजिए.
Namita ma'am, please make her co-host.
Yeah, I have unmuted. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, you are already co-host.
Right.
So I believe Radhika is also unmuted.
Okay,
now.
yeah, now I'm finally unmuted. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome Professor Namita Ranganathan to this session. And we are really delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Radhika.
And this is indeed a great pleasure because we've been really waiting to hear from you for a long time. And this faculty development program has become an occasion for us to meet you here and also to address the larger group of teaching faculty from across the country. If we maybe start, Lokesh?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Radhika, do you want me to speak in English or bilingual? I mean, I'm comfortable with bilingual also if you'd like that.
Bilingual will be ideal because a lot of people have been asking for it.
कोई दिक्कत नहीं है मुझे, कोई दिक्कत नहीं, अच्छा ही है in fact. क्योंकि one should be with everybody. ये तो बहुत important है. I want to start with a bit of intrigue.
Before you start, I would like to introduce you.
Okay. I thought you've introduced me. I teach in the Central Institute of Education. उससे और क्या चाहिए? That's
something.
it. बस काफी है.
Well, then I must begin with the informal part of the introduction, which is that anybody who has worked, been taught, or interacted with Professor Namita Ranganathan would never forget her because of the immense concern and consideration with which she interacts with scholars, students, faculty, and it's a concern that is so much grounded in ensuring that there is there's an academic integrity and ensuring that there is that everybody gains from that process of interaction. Professor Namita Ranganathan has been a professor in the Central Institute of Education, University of Delhi, for more than 35 years. She is the former head and dean of the Department of Education, and she's a postgraduate in psychology from the University of Bombay and PhD in education from Jawaharlal Nehru University. She has been a presiding officer of the Internal Complaints Committee of University of Delhi. She's been a member of the governing body of School of Open Learning. She's a special invitee and managing committee to the NCWEB, the Women's Education Board of University of Delhi. Her areas of interest are mental health, guidance and counseling, and human development, personality, gender studies, research methods, and teaches the same in the courses of B.Ed, M.Ed, M.Phil, and PhD. She has also guided several doctoral researchers and is the author and co-author of several books, chapters, and research papers. Her recent book, titled Understanding Childhood and Adolescence with SAGE, provides an in-depth insight and builds perspectives on each of these stages. Professor Ranganathan has been extensively engaged with schools across the country through various projects with the UNFPA, United Nations Population Fund, Care India, Aga Khan Foundation, and Save the Children, among others. She has also been on several management bodies of Kendriya Vidyalayas and several private schools. This introduction is only a small part of her entire persona, and I'm sure she will, how she's going to communicate to us is going to convey the larger parts of her persona. Professor Ranganathan has been speaking on this subject extensively, and we really look forward to her views on the education policy and what its implications for teacher education. Over to you, Professor Ranganathan.
Thank you so much, Radhika. I had told Ravneet I want a one-line introduction. So, you know, you have to be my student once more to understand what one line means, okay? Yeah. But anyway, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for putting me into context. I mean, Sanjay, Divya, Aarti, Neha, I know all of you. Dr. Lokesh se main mili nahi hu, but he's also from JNU. That I know. So, you know, we are sort of fellow mates. Okay. Everybody who's sort of unvideoed here, I know. Okay. Yeah. So I want to start with a note of intrigue. And what is my note of intrigue? मैंने जो टाइटल भेजा था उसका कोलन के बाद वाला हिस्सा नहीं था in the FDP. मैंने ये कहा था that I will talk about the re-envisioned or the restructured version or the nature of school education, and then there was a colon and it said, will it work, with a question mark. क्योंकि मुझे लगता है कि पॉलिसी पे तो आप सबने बहुत कुछ पढ़ा भी होगा, सुना भी होगा, और आपको मेन चेंजेस तो सबको पता ही हैं. एक्चुअली कामयाबी तब होती है एक पॉलिसी की जब हम उसको देखते हैं कि ऑन द ग्राउंड इन रियलिटी वो कैसे रोल आउट करेगा और क्या वो रोल आउट कर भी पाएगा. क्योंकि अक्सर जो हमने देखा है हिस्टोरिकली, मोस्ट पॉलिसीज में जो आइडियाज आते हैं उसमें से 50-60% तो रोल आउट हो जाते हैं. एक एक्शन प्लान बनता है एक फेज्ड मैनर में, अच्छी तरह 10 साल में, 20 साल में, 30 साल में रोल आउट हो जाता है. लेकिन कुछ ऐसी बातें हैं जो रेटोरिक्स में ही रह जाती हैं. तो इसीलिए आई वांटेड टू फोकस ऑन दैट डायमेंशन एंड आई विल फोकस ऑन दैट डायमेंशन. So my interest is, of course, to acquaint you with the policy, but also to raise the challenges and whether, you know, everything will work which is recommended in the policy in the area of school education. So that's going to be the kind of context and spectrum that I'm planning to take up with you. Having said that, पॉलिसी के कुछ इंटरेस्टिंग स्निपेट्स आपके साथ में शेयर करना चाहती हूँ, और शायद आपने सुने भी होंगे इधर उधर, लेकिन आई ऑलवेज लाइक टू स्टार्ट विद दैट. इस पॉलिसी ने 3 मिनिस्टर देख लिए, है ना. इट स्टार्टेड विद स्मृति ईरानी, it went on to Prakash Javadekar, and finally it has come out at the time of Dr. Ramesh Pokhriyal. So, you know, we've got 3 illuminary politicians who have kind of painted or made a portrait on this policy. That's one aspect. This policy has come after 34 years. So, क्या 34 साल हम स्टेराइल बैठे थे, कुछ हुआ नहीं क्या हमारे देश में? So, एक इशू ये भी है कि do we actually need a policy, or our programs are well-intentioned, small policies, small formulations enough to run a nation, ये भी एक विचारधारा है कि हमें क्या एक composite policy की आवश्यकता है भी कि नहीं, ये हम सोच सकते हैं। तीसरी चीज, जो फर्स्ट पॉलिसी आई थी 1968, that was headed by Professor D.S. Kothari. Second policy जो आई थी in the time of Rajiv Gandhi as Prime Minister, although the bureaucrats had assembled it, Professor Yashpal was a very big contributor to that. And this policy was, of course, led finally by Professor Kasturi Rangan. So, you know, all three have one common denominator. They were all physicists. The leaders of all the policies were physicists. So this is also something which you have to note, because, you know, physics is supposed to be the master science, and it has a kind of very, very structured approach to any issue. So physicists were called upon. I don't know whether it was by design or it was by accident, but they are the ones who ultimately, I think that is very, very interesting. And let us never forget that the backdrop of every policy is the Constitution of India. तो हमें जो Constitution of India के अंदर जो promises हैं, जो commitments हैं, we have to acknowledge those. And there is no way we can have a policy which circumvents constitutional values in any way. And this policy also has shown immense respect for all the constitutional values. So that is something which is common to all the policies. So that is something which we have to also keep in mind. There are two important movements which I want to highlight before I get into this policy and school education with you. Sabse pehle, I think everybody knows that the Right to Education Act was a path-breaking act. So it happened in 2009. The framing started in 2006. The committee was on the job, and in 2009, it got legitimized and it got adopted and passed by the parliament. And then education became a fundamental right. But unfortunately, it was the directive principle of state policy for children between 6 to 14 years, जो convert हो गई into the Right to Education Act. So, you know, 6 to 14 तो हो गया ना इधर के ना उधर के. Early childhood totally वंचित हो गया उससे. और जो subsequent years of schooling है, जिसको हम currently senior secondary कहते हैं, कहीं पे वो भी शामिल नहीं था. So it was very intriguing that, you know, is education only about 6 to 14-year-olds? And okay, you're giving them all education, you're giving them access, you're giving them a right. But is that enough? That became an important issue. So this policy has gone many steps further, and it has actually looked at issues, and it's kind of now compelling the Right to Education Act also to look into a lot of its anomalies. बहुत सारे movements थे जब Right to Education Act बना था, which were arguing for early childhood, right from birth to 6 years also to be part of it. Persons with disabilities का specific mention नहीं था, so that group was also very active. So ये सारे movements तो हुए. अब ये क्यों हुए movements? क्योंकि किसी भी policy में दो चीजें बहुत important है. One is that we have to accept the diversity which characterizes our pluralistic culture. We've got diversity in terms of a kaleidoscope. And I don't have to talk to you all about diversity because all of you are teachers and you're well aware of diversity. So A, we are committed to diversity, that is respecting diversity. ये तो एक common thread of all policies, all documents, all sarkar initiatives. The second is inclusion. Now, when we are talking about inclusion, earlier we used to talk only about social inclusion. And in social inclusion, हम marginalized communities and groups जो वंचित रह गए थे, वो शामिल हो जाएं और वो भी लाभ उठाएं, केवल access से नहीं, but even in terms of outcomes and life chances and life opportunities, ये हमारा concern होता था. लेकिन जब PWD Act 2016 में जब PWD Act पास हुई और उसका रिवाइज्ड वर्जन आया 2017 में, सो इंक्लूजन के तहत पर्सन्स विद डिसेबिलिटीज भी शामिल हो गए और इंक्लूजन का दायरा या प्लेटफॉर्म बहुत बढ़ गया. तो जब भी हम पॉलिसी देखें और जो भी मैं आप प्लीज ये तीन चीजें दिमाग में रखिए. सबसे पहले कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया एज द बैकड्रॉप, the inadequacy of right to education as it currently exists and the need to re-examine it in terms of stretching it on either side. ये आप ध्यान में रखिए। और तीसरा, द कमिटमेंट टू रिस्पेक्टिंग डाइवर्सिटी एंड इंक्लूजन, इसको भी आप अपने दिमाग में रखिए। Now let us actually come to the policy and I am going to focus on school education. पॉलिसी का जो जब ड्राफ्ट आया था तो हम लोगों ने 460 करीब पन्ने पढ़े थे, बड़ी रात दिन लगा के पढ़े वो पन्ने। बहुत सारा बैकड्रॉप था, कॉन्टेक्स्ट था, ब्यूरोक्रेट्स ने उसको ड्राफ्ट किया था। द लैंग्वेज वाज आल्सो यू नो ऑफ अ डिफरेंट काइंड, इट वाज वेरी जार्गन इंटेंसिव एटसेट्रा। पर बड़ा दिमाग लगा, बड़े कॉन्फ्रेंसेस हुए, बड़े थिंक टैंक मीटिंग्स हुई एंड वी ऑल सेंट आवर रिस्पॉन्सेस। आप सब ने भेजा होगा, हम सब ने भी भेजा, संजय ने आई एम श्योर अपने यूनिवर्सिटी से भी भेजा होगा, सब ने रिस्पॉन्स भेजा। उसके बाद जब जावड़ेकर साहब सीट में थे तो एक रिवाइज ड्राफ्ट आया, एक एडिशनल ड्राफ्ट आया ऑफ 42 पेजेस, तो उसमें कुछ इंडियन वैल्यूज एटसेट्रा का भी मेंशन था। फिर हम लोग वेट करते रहे कि अब एक कॉम्पोजिट पॉलिसी आएगी और लगा कि अब तो 500 पेज की पॉलिसी आएगी। बट जब एक्चुअली एक क्रिस्प पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट आया वो केवल 64 या 65 पेज का था, वो आया हमारे पास। और वो लगा जैसे कि एक एग्जीक्यूटिव समरी आ गई है, यू नो, ऑफ द होल डॉक्यूमेंट, क्योंकि सबने पढ़ा था एज एकेडमिक्स, all of us who are interested in education, we ought to be, because we're all part of this system, we were expecting something very big. But when you read those 64 pages, every line is very crucial, because every line has to be deconstructed, every line has to be located in some reality, some data, some context, and you have to actually read between the lines as well. तो ये जो नई पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट आई है इसमें 4 हिस्से हैं, ये तो आप सबको पता ही है। अच्छी बात ये है कि स्कूल एजुकेशन को बहुत महत्व दिया गया है इसमें, इसीलिए मैं ये सारा आपको बैकड्रॉप दे रही हूँ। तो सबसे ज्यादा पन्ने या सबसे ज्यादा महत्व जो कहेंगे, द मोस्ट significant component of this policy document is the section on school education. उसके बाद higher education, and then there's relatively less space accorded to professional education, liberal arts education, arts and aesthetics education, etc. सब कुछ है, but less space is given to it. And finally, there's a small section. So school education, by design, by intent, by the fact that you're dealing with childhood and with adolescence as life stages, becomes very important in any polity, any economy, in any culture. This is the central idea. So now let us look at the reforms in school education and let us see how they will work. अब मैं आपको ना थोड़ी देर के लिए, क्योंकि आप सब अपने घर में बैठे हैं, आपको थोड़ा भ्रमण कराना चाहूंगी। मैंने ना स्लाइड्स वगैरह नहीं बनाए, मैं थिएट्रिकली बोल बोल के आपको एक भ्रमण कराऊंगी, ठीक है? तो सबसे पहले मैं आपको अलवर ले जा रही हूँ, और संजय गया था मेरे साथ इस ट्रिप में अलवर, तो संजय भी अपने दिमाग में ये बातें रखेगा, ही कैन ऑल्सो कॉन्ट्रीब्यूट टू इट। मैं आपको अलवर ले जा रही हूँ, ठीक है? सो दिल्ली से हम ड्राइव करते हुए अलवर जा रहे हैं। अलवर डिस्ट्रिक्ट is also part of, by the way, NCR. It is the boundary where NCR ends. वहाँ हम पहुँचते अलवर, so there is a block called the Thanagazi block over there. Okay, now that used to be an educationally backward block, but now it's a flourishing educational block. है पूरा ग्रामीण क्षेत्र। वहाँ हम पहुँचे तो बड़ी अच्छी बच्चों की खिलखिलाती आवाजें आ रही थी एक आंगन से। तो जब हम लोग रुके वहाँ पे और घुसे उस आंगन में, तो वहाँ आंगनवाड़ी चल रही थी, ठीक है? आंगनवाड़ी चल रही थी, वहाँ एक महिला थी आंगनवाड़ी वर्कर, उसकी एक असिस्टेंट थी, 13-14 बच्चे थे, और वो बच्चे कम उम्र के थे, वही 0 to 6 years के एज ग्रुप के बच्चे थे, और गाना भी गा रहे थे, कोई रो रहा था, कोई मिड डे मील खा रहा था, तरह तरह की एक्टिविटीज वहाँ पे हो रही थी, और कुछ माएँ भी बैठी थी और 1-2 एक्सपेक्टेंट मदर्स भी बैठी थी। तो टोटल सिनारियो बड़ा चीयरफुल था। तो हम लोग को लगा वाओ, दिस इज अ रियल हैपनिंग आंगनबाड़ी। यहाँ क्या हो रहा है? यहाँ हेल्थ की भी बातें हो रही है, न्यूट्रिशन की भी बातें हो रही हैं, शिक्षा भी चल रही है कहीं पे, एंड एक्सपेक्टेंट मदर्स को भी शिक्षा दी जा रही है, So, you know, that is what the ICDS scheme is all about, the Integrated Child Development Scheme. और ये यहाँ बड़ी इफेक्टिवली चल रही है. जब हमने आंगनवाड़ी वर्कर से पूछा, आप कितनी पढ़ी लिखी हैं मैडम, आप इतनी अच्छी होशियारी से ये सब कुछ चला रही हैं, तो बोली मैं तो 10वीं पास हूँ मैडम, और मैं इसी इलाके की हूँ, मैं एक एक बच्चे को, एक एक परिवार को जानती हूँ, लोग मेरे को बहुत ट्रस्ट करते हैं, सो हमारा बहुत बढ़िया चलता है यहाँ पे. हमें बड़ी संतुष्टि हुई कि काश सारे आंगनवाड़ी ऐसे ही चले तो कितनी अच्छी बात होगी. सो 0 to 6 years की जो एजुकेशन हो रही थी, अर्ली चाइल्डहुड केयर एंड एजुकेशन, वो उस आंगनवाड़ी में हो रही थी. थोड़ा आगे गए हम लोग तो वहां पे प्राथमिक पाठशाला थी, सरकार की थी प्राथमिक पाठशाला. सो दैट वाज फ्रॉम क्लास 1 to class 5 because the primary school is a distinct entity there. I'm only taking the case example of Rajasthan, but you can see this across states. So although I'm focusing on one state, I would request you to apply your minds to all states where this kind of a model exists. So the primary school was happening. There was one headmaster and there were 3 other teachers. 2 teachers were on election duty. They were updating census records. एक कहने लगी मुझे पशु गणना में भी जाना है. So, you know, they sort of make a list of all the animals also in every village or in every hamlet and then in every revenue village. तो वहाँ चल रही थी, तो मल्टीग्रेड टीचिंग चल रही थी. टीचर्स वर क्वाइट मोटिवेटेड, कुछ भी करके शिक्षा तो ग्रहण कर ही रहे थे बच्चे, चाहे तूपड़ हो रहा था, चाहे वो सुलेख हो रहा था, चाहे कहीं पे एक्टिविटी बेस्ड लर्निंग हो रही थी, लर्निंग तो हो रही थी. टीचर्स को संतुष्टि थी कि बच्चे पूरे आते, अटेंडेंस अच्छी होती है और हम उनको पढ़ाते हैं. सो दैट वाज हैपनिंग. फिर हमने पूछा माध्यमिक शाला कहाँ है, वेयर इज द मिडिल स्कूल. सो वी वर, you know, taken a little further. So there was a school from class 6 to class 10. So their notion of madhyamik was class 6 to class 10. So there you had students from class 6 to class 10 and they were studying in sections and there were specific teachers, there were subject teachers, वो उनको पढ़ा रहे थे, साइंस भी पढ़ा रहे थे, और वो NCERT की और राजस्थान की स्टेट SCRT SIT होता है वहाँ पे, उसकी किताबें वो पढ़ा रहे थे. माध्यम हिंदी था और बच्चे पढ़ रहे थे. And then finally we said, where is class 11 and 12? Because that's also part of the schooling system. So they said, देखिए वो तो हमारे यहाँ intermediate कहलाती है, वो intermediate college होती है. So then they told us to go to some place and that was the intermediate college, and then education was happening there. It was exclusively for 11th and 12th and it was an intermediate college. There were girls and boys. It was co-educational. All the schools were co-educational, by the way. Okay. So one model of education as it exists today is this model whereby levels of schooling, schools have separate structures and you find that everybody does their work. So this is one existing model. When we went to Alwar proper, in Alwar proper, we were taken to what was called a composite government school also. So what was that composite government school? अब जब से समग्र शिक्षा आई, उसके पहले दिल्ली में तो सर्वोदय विद्यालय आ चुके थे. सर्वोदय विद्यालय दिल्ली में जो थे, they used to start from class 1 and go on to class 12. But जब से समग्र शिक्षा आई, they had to also move downwards further and have a nursery and a kindergarten section. So what we typically saw, and Ravneet went with me on one of the trips when we went to Delhi Dehat, we went to the rural area, we found that nursery and KG was one group, and there were 2 or 3 teachers. For every 10 children, there was one facilitator, and they were being prepared or made ready for regular school in class 1. So we saw one such school where in one campus, everything was happening. Pre-primary भी वहीं हो रहा था, primary भी, secondary भी, senior secondary, सब कुछ वहीं हो रहा था. And that was the usual kind of school which you see. We saw a government school, but if you go to the private sector, you see a replica of the same thing happening. Okay, all the private schools, whether they are the low-end private schools, the low-cost private schools, or they are the high-fee charging schools, they all follow the same approach. Okay, then we went to what was called an English medium private school where the fee structure was low. So we wanted to see यहाँ क्या हो रहा है. So हम जब वहाँ पे गए, तो हमने देखा कि बहुत सारे जो बच्चे ग्रामीण स्कूल्स में थे वो यहाँ भी एनरोल्ड थे, एक डबल एनरोलमेंट था। क्यों आए थे भाई यहाँ पे? इसलिए आए थे कि दिस वाज एन इंग्लिश मीडियम स्कूल एंड फॉर देम इंग्लिश or education in English medium was actually an identity, it was an aspiration, it was a dream, and it was seen as a means to upward mobility. So they had come to that school. वहाँ पे कैसी education हो रही थी? Teachers were very lowly paid. There were very crowded classes. You know, the space was very constricted and restricted because they had to keep their costs very low. But education was going on. I'm not talking about pedagogy here at all. I haven't come to that yet. But some sort of education was going on. And then if you go to one of the air-conditioned high-end schools in any capital city, you find that, you know, the school is spread out, it's got cultivated manicured gardens, it's got fantastic sports facilities, it's got well-equipped classrooms, it's got technology, it's got smart boards, it's got teachers earning well, it's got rich children with state-of-the-art bags, etc. And education is happening there, but everybody is studying for the same board examination. Everybody is studying in the same structured system. For the first time, it struck me that this diversity is so daunting. You know, you can't stand up and say that this model is right and that model is wrong, because every model is a response to local needs. Please note this point. Every model is a response to the local needs, to the local market. So can we uniformize education is the question I want to raise, or can diverse models continue? Should diverse models continue, which respect culture, context, and local needs, is the second vital question that I want to raise. Now, coming to NEP 2020. What has NEP 2020 done? It has reimagined the whole schooling process, and it has given us a completely new structure. And the structure is fascinating. Theoretically, you cannot fault that structure anywhere because they have kept global standards in mind. They have looked at global research. They've looked at patterns across different countries. They've looked at small countries like Finland, which are very successful on the one hand, and they have looked at Bangladesh on the other hand, which is like us. It resembles us in terms of all our development indicators. And they've also drawn lessons from UK, from America, from some of the South African countries, and from Singapore. So, you know, it's a kind of amalgamation, a composite of lessons learned from all over the place. So what is this new structure? Just to tell you very briefly, and then I want to get into raising some questions about this alternative structure, because I think as educators, as teachers, we need to look at things in a larger spectrum, in a larger perspective. Okay, so what have they done? अभी तो 10+2+3 सिस्टम है जो NCERT ने इंस्टीट्यूट किया था कोठारी कमीशन के टाइम से, फर्स्ट एजुकेशन कमीशन से रेकमेंड हुआ था, and it got instituted in the 70s. Now that method or that system of 10+2+3, you know, 10 meant 10 years of childhood were homogenized. They were put together in a capsule. So year 1, first standard, and year 10, the 10th board examination, was seen as one big platform in which class 1 would start preparing you eventually for class 10. And that's how it got interpreted. And there are lots of critical writings about this. None of us like it like that. But the fact is that this was happening in a lot of places. Okay? Now they have reimagined it. And they have said that, you know, childhood and the capacity of the child. And what has been recognized very beautifully is that the child has agency. The child has agentic forces. The child has a voice. The child has his or her own experiences. The child has capability. And, you know, let us not see the child as somebody who is hapless, who can't decide, who can't direct his or her own learning, and who has to all the time be trained or socialized or educated. Use whatever term you want to. So for the first time, childhood was seen as school-based childhood, was seen in terms of potential, and the age group of 3 to 8 years, so that is 5 years, those 5 years were seen as the most critical years. in the whole schooling process. Okay. So 3 to 8 years is when a child is in nursery kindergarten and also in class 1 and 2. So what has this policy done? It has bridged pre-primary with the early primary years. Pehle first and second was part of primary. So the cutoff was pre-primary and then you jumped into primary. Now there is a developmental continuity which has been acknowledged कि nursery KG का जो बच्चा है class 1 and 2 तक उसकी foundational skills या उसके जो capabilities हैं उनको स्थापित करना, उनको establish करना बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है. And so the recommendation of foundational literacy and numeracy. लिटरेसी और न्यूमेरेसी को हम केवल लैंग्वेज और मैथमेटिक्स से ना जोड़ें. लिटरेसी का मतलब होता है not only the ability to read, it is to read with meaning, to deconstruct, to expand one's vocabulary, to also build understanding, and language is supposed to complement thought. आप इसको इस तरह से देखिए. Similarly, numeracy जो है वो केवल इसलिए नहीं है कि हम सम्स कर लें और हम नंबर्स को समझें और हम सारे नंबर फंक्शंस को कर लें, वो तो हमें करना ही है. But numbers have to be seen in the way Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo look at numbers. That children without algorithms, children with their own native intuitive theories, with their own socio-cultural theories of mathematics, are also able to make meaning and sense out of numbers. तो वो भी acknowledge करना. And finally bringing children by the time they're in class 2 to some kind of standard language which they will use throughout their schooling, and some kind of standard baseline for mathematics learning which will also equip them for all subsequent stages of mathematics. तो ये इनका प्लान था. सवाल मैं दो उठाना चाहती हूँ यहाँ. सवाल ये है कि इससे क्या होगा. मतलब ये बहुत बड़ी चुनौती है सरकार के सामने, एंड आई एम श्योर सोच रहे हैं. देयर आर एक्शन ग्रुप्स विच आर वर्किंग ऑन द रोल आउट प्लान. मैंने एक एक्सप्रेस अड्डा अटेंड किया था जिसमें मिनिस्टर खुद बोले थे, और एक एक्सप्रेस अड्डा अटेंड किया था जिसमें सेक्रेटरी हायर एजुकेशन अमित खरे बोले थे. तो मेरे भी फर्स्ट हैंड अनुभव है उनके इरादों का. तो मिनिस्टर ने, रमेश पोखरियाल जी ने कहा ये बात कि चुनौती बहुत जबरदस्त है और कि हम आंगनवाड़ी को स्कूल में लाएंगे, स्कूल को आंगनवाड़ी के पास ले जाएंगे, या आंगनवाड़ी को सेपरेटली रहने देंगे और बच्चों को फिर स्कूल में लाएंगे. They haven't worked out all those realities. But the fact is, आपके जितने टीचर एजुकेशन प्रोग्राम्स अभी हैं वो एनटीटी नर्सरी टीचर्स ट्रेनिंग को अलग देखते हैं और वो प्राइमरी एजुकेशन को या एलिमेंट्री एजुकेशन को भी अलग देखते हैं. Department of Elementary Education of Mata Sundari College has set up this whole FDP. So they focus on elementary. They don't focus on pre-primary and early childhood. They may start with that for explanations, but the training which they give, the skilling which they give, the perspective building which they do is for the elementary school years. So how this marriage will happen? ये शादी कैसे होगी और इस शादी को सफल बनाने के लिए क्या सरकार कर पाएगी? क्योंकि एक और प्रॉब्लम है कि आंगनवाड़ी वर्कर्स क्योंकि लोकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट से लिए जाते हैं तो अक्सर उनके एजुकेशनल क्वालिफिकेशंस इतने नहीं होते हैं कि वो टीचर भी बन पाए. सो कैसे ये होगा, उनका स्किल अपग्रेडेशन कैसे होगा, उनका सर्टिफिकेशन कैसे होगा, उनके सर्विस कंडीशंस क्या होंगे. वी हैव टू रीथिंक दिस. एंड अगर आप उनको शिक्षा में ही लगा दें तो टीकाकरण भी तो महत्वपूर्ण है और न्यूट्रिशन भी तो महत्वपूर्ण है. बिकॉज ऑल द स्टंटिंग, जितने आप ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट इंडेक्स रिपोर्ट में स्टंटिंग के पैटर्न्स देखते हैं, अंडर नरिशमेंट के पैटर्न्स देखते हैं, दे ऑल बिगिन इन द फर्स्ट 5 years. So, the Anganwadi has a very important role to play to ensure the health and well-being of children as well. So this is one big chunoti, or one big challenge which confronts us, and it's something which we will have to figure out. Secondly, if we are looking at foundational literacy and numeracy as a policy imperative and a commitment, then, a kind of curriculum, I wouldn't like to call it a structured curriculum, but some sort of framework or guidelines or a basket of activities which can be contextualized in different scenarios will have to be developed. Because if you ask teachers to make it work and leave it to them alone without giving a framework, different things will happen in different setups. The idea is that at the end of class 2, children will be strong in their foundational skills, and they will also have what we call school readiness for the subsequent stage. Subsequent stage जो सरकार ने हमें बताई है, so पहले 5 साल हो गए, the next stage is 3, 5 plus 3. वो 3 years क्या हैं? बच्चा 8 से 11 साल की उम्र का है आप, ओके? सो इस बच्चे का क्या क्लास की पोजीशन है? 3rd, 4th, 5th स्टैंडर्ड में ये पढ़ता है. Now 3rd, 4th, 5th standard in the existing system is called the upper primary. Okay, it's called the upper primary. But now, in the new perspective in NEP, it is seen as the preparatory. It's called the preparatory stage. So when you talk of a stage as preparatory, it means that you're preparing for something which is to follow. And you're not seeing it as the culmination of something which is completed. अभी इसको culmination देखते हैं. भाई 3rd, 4th, 5th upper primary है, primary का culmination 5th standard हुआ. अब 3rd, 4th, 5th जो है preparatory हो गया, ठीक है ना? Obviously, it's a preparation for the more serious education and the discipline-centric education, the subject-based learning, which is to follow. The next stage is called the middle school stage, and that takes children from class 6, 7, and 8. It covers those children. 6th class, 7th class, and 8th class. And that's called the middle school stage. अब आप सब मेरे साथ agree करेंगे, middle school stage बहुत महत्वपूर्ण होता है, because suddenly all the disciplines unfold before you. So even if you're studying social science, there is history, there is geography, there is political science and economics. There's a multiplier effect. All of that becomes a tangible component of social sciences, and everything can't be integrated. So there are some standalone subject topics and teaching which takes place. Likewise in the sciences, it's called general science. So you have physics, you have chemistry, you have biology. Everything can't be synthesized. Teachers do try to integrate. Divya is a science teacher. She's right here in front of me in the screen. It's not possible to integrate all of physics, chemistry, and biology. So there are standalone physics lessons, chemistry lessons, and biology lessons in the 6th, 7th, 8th curriculum. So suddenly the pressure is very, very immense. Even when you look at singular subjects like mathematics, mathematics gets stratified into arithmetic, algebra, and construction geometry. Prior to that, you don't have construction geometry, you have recognition geometry. So, you recognize shapes and sizes and this and that. But now you have construction geometry, you have theorems, and you have to actually contemplate on the laws which inform theorems. It's set on a model of physics and on a purist affirmatory model. बच्चे को 6th, 7th, 8th में वो भी पढ़ना पड़ रहा है. So, this complexity of the middle school is very, very daunting for children. And textbook आती है, हेल्प बुक्स आती हैं, इवैल्यूएशन बढ़ जाता है, प्रोजेक्ट वर्क शुरू हो जाता है, बच्चे को सडनली टेस्ट देने पड़ते हैं, so life of the child is no longer that of a child left alone to discover the world. It's a structured childhood, or you can even say an adolescence. अगर हम माने कि किशोरावस्था होती है, so it is the beginning of a structured adolescence which is happening with you. So this is the next 3 years. So 5 plus 3 plus 3 to ho gaya. And then the very interesting radical change is कि 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th को एक cohort बना दिया है NEP में. पहले ये secondary और senior secondary कहलाता था. तो 11th, 12th को senior secondary हम मानते थे. मैंने आपको intermediate की बात करी थानागाजी डिस्ट्रिक्ट में, और ये पूरे भारत में ये मॉडल होता है. कहीं पे इसको प्री यूनिवर्सिटी कोर्स कहते हैं, कहीं पे स्कूल में होता है, कहीं पे कॉलेज में होता है, कहीं जूनियर कॉलेज कहते हैं इसको, और कहीं पे इंटरमीडिएट कहते हैं, और वो सब कॉलेज में होते हैं. द पॉइंट इज टीचर क्वालिफिकेशंस भी अलग हैं इस लेवल के लिए, और जो कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी है इनके कोर्सेज की, सिलेबस की, ये भी अलग है, क्योंकि दीज आर सीन एज प्रेपरेशन फॉर कॉलेज और फॉर हायर एजुकेशन. whether you go for professional education or you go for general education, it doesn't matter. So अब इस सब को क्लब करके they are calling it secondary stage. ठीक है? So it's a very big challenge. Again, you don't have teachers who are trained in this. अभी तो आपका जो qualification है वो post graduation है for teachers to teach 11th and 12th. और 10th तक ग्रेजुएट टीचर भी पढ़ा सकती है ना? तो ये जितने RNR कंडीशंस हैं, जितने अभी मानसिकता में लोगों के जो बने हुए स्ट्रक्चर्स है, we'll have to unlearn a lot of things. And I'm also wondering whether we can actually notionally club 9th with 12th. We can build up foundations in different disciplines. Yes, I agree. We can start teaching very seriously in class 9, physics or chemistry or psychology or English or geography or whatever we want to teach. But whether we can see this as a composite cohort is something we really need to reflect upon, because our structures will have to change hugely in terms of teacher preparation, in terms of curricular planning, and in terms of transitions which children make from one stage to another. A very perplexing matter in this is, and it has been raised in different webinars and forums, कि क्या बोर्ड एग्जाम होगा या कुछ इवैल्यूएशन का एग्जाम होगा, ट्रांजिशन कैसे होगा? अब सेकंड स्टैंडर्ड में जब बच्चा पहुंचेगा, हम कैसे तय करेंगे कि वो थर्ड स्टैंडर्ड के लायक तैयार हो गया है? ऐसी फिफ्थ क्लास में क्या बोर्ड एग्जाम होगा या कोई परीक्षा होगी जो फिर उसको सिक्स्थ में भेजेगा? सिमिलरली एट्थ में कोई ऐसी परीक्षा होगी टू मार्क द एंड ऑफ दोज 3 years and to send the child to class 9? ये सारे इश्यूज सरकार को सोचने पड़ेंगे और सोच रहे होंगे. I'm sure NCRT and the body, the August body which has been set up, is looking into these matters. So what I'm trying to therefore tell you is, when you have structures in place and you've had a legacy of these structures in place, and when change is introduced and radical change is introduced, there has to be complete unlearning first, and we have to start thinking afresh. अगर हम प्लग करने की कोशिश करेंगे कि एग्जिस्टिंग स्ट्रक्चर में हम कहाँ पे पॉइंट्स ढूंढेंगे जहाँ हम प्लग बना सकते हैं या घुसेड़ सकते हैं, that will not serve our purpose. We have to create new and novel structures of curriculum, of pedagogy, of syllabus construction, of framework evolution, and of teacher training. That is very, very important. तो ये तो रहा regarding the structure of school education. अब आते हैं बड़े कंट्रोवर्शियल मुद्दे पे, और इसमें तो आपने भी बहुत अपना दिमाग लगाया होगा सबने, मीडियम ऑफ इंस्ट्रक्शन का. ठीक है, अब पॉलिसी में जो रिकमेंडेशन है, इफ यू एक्चुअली रीड द लाइंस, इट यूजेस वेरी कन्वीनियंटली द वर्ड प्रेफरेबली. हाँ, तो ये आपको फोर्स नहीं करता है, ये आपको प्रेफरेबली कहता है. एंड व्हाट डज इट सजेस्ट? It says that the medium of instruction should preferably be the mother tongue or the child's home language up to class 5 and even up to class 8 if possible. ये वो आपको बताता है. ठीक है, अब वो क्यों बताता है? वो इसलिए आपको बताता है कि all over the world, and research has demonstrated that indeed, if in the foundational years children are taught in their mother tongue or in their home language, their ability to learn, their ability to grasp, their ability to retain, and their ability to form a lexicon and a vocabulary is all facilitated by this. ये सब evidence है हम लोगों के पास. Brain development maximal है early years में, इसीलिए 3 to 8 years के बच्चों को maximum input सरकार देना चाहती है, and we laud that, we really appreciate that. लेकिन इंडिया में क्योंकि इतना प्लूरलिज्म है, बोलियां इतनी हैं, भाषा तो मानक भाषा एक है लेकिन बोलियां बहुत सारी हैं. सेकेंडली इंटरकल्चरल मैरिजेस है, इंटरकास्ट मैरिजेस हैं, इतना माइग्रेशन है, इतना मूवमेंट है, तो आप कैसे तय करेंगे? Another thing, and I'm raising this, it may be controversial for some of you, but I'm leaving it as a thought in your minds because it's something which worries me. We were colonized by the British. They taught us how to speak English. And because we are able to speak English, a lot of people have been successful in the international scenario because they have used English as a means to upward mobility. There's no denying of this. much that we would not like it, and we keep saying, oh, the Chinese president speaks in Chinese and the Russian president speaks in Russian. They were not colonized countries. Our history and our legacy has been very different. So the haves and the have-nots are differentiated very much on whether they have a capacity to read in English, speak in English, get educated in English, or whether they do not. हर गांव में संजय मेरे साथ गया है and he's testimony to this. Ravneet has gone with me to the villages. हर गांव में मांग है कि आप अंग्रेजी केजी से पढ़ाना शुरू करिए. And that is why those private English medium schools where the teachers don't even know English but फिर भी बच्चे वहां जाते क्योंकि English medium का छाप लगता है, they are being thrown. So English is not to be seen only as a language. English is to be seen as a means to upward mobility, as a fulfillment to one's dreams, desires, and aspirations, as a family's story to bring a positive change to its context and its background. Look at it from the wider lens. So, choice तो मिलना चाहिए. मंत्री को जब ये प्रश्न डाला गया एक्सप्रेस अड्डा में, मंत्री ने कहा कि हम मना थोड़ी कर रहे हैं कि आप अंग्रेजी मत पढ़िए, हम केवल कह रहे हैं कि आप मीडियम ऑफ इंस्ट्रक्शन की सुविधा भाषाओं में दीजिए. और उन्होंने जो कोट किया वो उन्होंने 8th शेड्यूल ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन कोट किया जहां पे 22 लैंग्वेजेस नोटिफाइड हैं. उन्होंने कहा, एंड ही राइटली सो, ही इज द मंत्री, ही हैज टू अपहोल्ड द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, कि वो जो 22 लैंग्वेजेस हैं दे मस्ट बी अपहेल्ड एंड दे मस्ट आल्सो फाइंड articulation and expression in different schools. ठीक है? So somewhere we have to look for a balance. What I'm trying to say is we have to look for a balance. How the government is going to do this? Are you now going to tell children who want to study in English medium schools that, sorry, those schools will not exist? You can't do that. You can't do that. So you have to keep options, you have to keep possibilities available. Tell people what the advantages of different systems are. Educate, like we do public education. We do public education on COVID, on dengue. You can even do it on school choices and medium of instruction. You can have public education systems. So that is a very, very big issue. In every webinar on the policy that I have heard, school principals particularly have expressed a lot of concern and anxiety because they're being inundated with queries on this issue. And the upper class is thinking that they'll now have to send their children from the time of birth for their education abroad. So that's such a foolish idea. That's just such a foolish idea. So let us hope that the government comes up, because on the one hand, you are inviting foreign universities, you're saying that you want to make a global citizen, but then up to class 8, if you want to give preference to the home language and the mother tongue, you're somewhere at cross purposes. So I just want to mention to you that in Europe, the model that I have read in Europe is they find that children can learn 2 languages very comfortably. So they are educated in one language and they pick up the second language. And our children demonstrate the same. अगर अंग्रेजी माध्यम में पढ़ते भी तो हिंदी ले लेते हैं या तमिल ले लेते हैं या जो भी सेकंड लैंग्वेज हो, जिस भी राज्य में है उस राज्य की भाषा ले लेते हैं. So can we look at this from a wider canvas and a wider lens rather than just a blind application of some researches? We have to contextualize those researches and also see the aspiration structure. The sociology and the backdrop and the history and the evolution have to form the trajectory for this, is what I'm proposing. I come to the final point because I also want to take questions from all of you. The final point in school education which I want to raise is about the introduction of vocational subjects from class 6 onwards. So, you know, the government has studied the Singapore model. So in Singapore, all of you would be knowing that they do their sifting and sorting at the end of class 5. Children who don't show promise in middle school are recommended that they go to the vocational stream so that at the end of it, they can have a dignified job, they can have dignified preparation, and the government ensures that they get some sort of placement at the end of it and they can lead a life of earning and dignity. And the other children study in the mainstream system and then go on in whatever fashion they want to go on. Will it work in our country? क्योंकि देखिए हमारे यहाँ वोकेशनलाइजेशन ऑफ एजुकेशन नई बात नहीं है. कोठारी कमीशन ने भी रेकमेंड किया. और हम सबको पता है कि जो वोकेशनल सब्जेक्ट्स हैं उनकी जो स्थिति है, हमने एक हायरार्की ऑफ सब्जेक्ट्स क्रिएट कर दी है। जो बच्चे फेल हो रहे हैं, पास नहीं हो सकते, उनसे कहते हैं आपको होम साइंस करना पड़ेगा, आपको कुकिंग करना पड़ेगा, आपको ब्यूटी whatever it's called, grooming and beauty course करना पड़ेगा, आपको carpentry लेना पड़ेगा, आपको physical education लेना पड़ेगा। ये हम ऐसे बच्चों को बोलते हैं। गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स में बहुत उदाहरण हैं ऐसे बच्चों के, and there are many studies। तो शुरू से ही आप उनको वहाँ पुश कर देते हैं तो इनको आगे जाके अपॉर्चुनिटी मिलती नहीं है। नाउ द प्रॉब्लम इज, चलिए आपने पुश भी कर दिया, at the end of doing a beauty culture course in school or at the end of doing carpentry in school, the child still has to go to an ITI or a private polytechnic for certification। ऐसा नहीं कि स्कूल से निकल के कोई उसको जॉब में अब्जॉर्प्शन मिल जाता है। आपको पता है स्किल इंडिया भी फेल हो गया, पहले पूरी इंडिपेंडेंट मिनिस्ट्री थी, तो अब स्किल्स को रीडिफाइन करके जो प्रधानमंत्री कौशल विकास योजना है, that has reinvented itself and it's looking at skilling in very different ways now। उसको वो कहीं पे इंडस्ट्री के साथ भी जोड़ रहा है, बिकॉज डिग्निटी और व्यवसाय वो भी महत्व रखता है। सो जो ये आप डिवाइड कर देते ना वाइट और ब्लू कॉलर वर्कर को, कि भाई जो पढ़ सकता है वो वाइट कॉलर के लिए ट्राई तो कर सकता है, लेकिन जो पढ़ नहीं सकता है, तो थोड़ा कमजोर है, उसको आप ब्लू कॉलर वर्कर बना के रखिए। क्या हमें ये करना चाहिए? क्योंकि हम नॉन डिस्क्रिमिनेशन, हम इक्विटी, हम इक्वालिटी, है ना, इस तरह की बातें करते हैं। और हम बोलते हैं इक्वालिटी ऑफ एजुकेशनल अपॉर्चुनिटी इज नॉट जस्ट इक्वालिटी ऑफ एक्सेस, इट्स ऑल्सो इक्वालिटी ऑफ ट्रीटमेंट एंड सम आउटकम्स। We talk about all these debates. There's no time for me to get into the debates, but we talk about all this. So एक anxiety restructured school education के साथ ये भी है कि will these vocational subjects work? And if they will, how will they work? How will the rollout plan happen? So मंत्री ने जो बताया, उन्होंने कहा देखिए हम जल्दबाजी में कुछ नहीं करेंगे, हमारे पास 5 साल की योजना है, 10 साल की योजना है, एंड अल्टीमेट रोल आउट प्लान हमारा 2030 का होगा। जो अमित खरे हैं सेक्रेटरी हायर एजुकेशन, वो कह रहे थे कि ये जो न्यू पॉलिसी लागू होगी, ये 2 साल बाद अगर लागू होगी तो वो लागू होगी और हम आउटकम देखेंगे बच्चे की जो पूरी ट्रैवर्सिटी स्कूल एजुकेशन का करके निकलेगा कि वो क्या हासिल करता है इस सिस्टम से, तभी हमें इसकी फीडबैक या मजबूरियां समझ में आएंगी। सो दे आर अडॉप्टिंग अ लॉन्गिट्यूडनल अप्रोच। They can't look at cross sections because you're just going to have a new batch entering into this whole new restructured system whenever we start, whether it's next year or year after next. My final submission is कि देखिए शिक्षा जो है आपकी concurrent list में आती है, जिसका मतलब हुआ कि स्टेट्स जो हैं उनका भी बहुत एक महत्व रहता है, और स्कूली शिक्षा में स्टेट काफ़ी कंट्रोल करता है क्योंकि हर स्टेट में अपना बोर्ड है और उस बोर्ड से वो शिक्षा की स्टैंडर्ड्स, क्वालिटीज, बच्चे क्या पढ़ेंगे, ये सब कंट्रोल करते हैं। और इस पॉलिसी में उनका कंसल्टेशन शामिल नहीं था। कई स्टेट्स ने अपना एंग्विश एक्सप्रेस किया है डिफरेंट वेज में। तो सरकार कैसे स्टेट्स को भी प्रिपेयर करेगा, ये भी उसके सामने एक चुनौती है। कुछ आई एम श्योर कुछ योजनाएं सोच रहा होगा। So I end by saying it's a reimagined school, it's a reimagined childhood, it's a reimagined adolescence. But with reimagination comes a new world. But the preparation for that new world requires a lot of change, a lot of effort, and a completely new trajectory. Are we ready for that? Will it work? And how can we make it work? I leave you to think. Thank you very much. And I'm absolutely ready for any questions, any comments, any feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ranganathan. This has been, you've really pointed out to not only the various elements of features of the policy, but also areas that need deliberation, that need also lacuna that may be there, that are like challenges and that needs further looking into. We have a few questions already in the chat box, and I would request other participants also to put in your queries here. As Professor Ranganathan has said, she's ready
Okay, there are a lot of comments I can see also. Lambe comments in the chat box.
Yeah.
So, Radhika, are you going to sift some of the questions and put them to me, or what do you want
Yes,
me to do?
I can do that. I'll just one. It's
How
more
do you
like
want
the first thing is about अगर कोई विद्यार्थी 2 वर्ष के पश्चात B.Ed 4 वर्षीय कोर्स छोड़ जाता है, तो क्या उसे शिक्षा में प्रमाण पत्र मिलेगा या नहीं? So, in terms of what's the implication of this 4-year course in terms of exit policy?
So, at the moment, you are going to get certification at the end of everything. Hannah, this is a question which also pertains to higher education, where they've told you in the four-year undergraduate program, if you leave in first year, you'll get a certificate, second year, you'll get a diploma, third year, you'll get a degree, fourth year, you'll get an honors placement. So, certification तो आपको मिलेगा, ये हमें बताया गया, but कैसे मिलेगा, courses कैसे structure होंगे, आपकी तैयारी क्या होगी, आपकी employability कैसे होगी, and all we don't know. Similarly, in teacher preparation, Pranati ने भी आपको बताया होगा, and I'm sure Mr. Saluja in the morning and Saroj Sharma would have also told you that there are going to be multiple paths for teacher preparation also. So 4-year program भी होगा, 2-year program भी होगा, और 1-year B.Ed भी होगा. There are going to be 3 paths at least till 2030 or 2040. That's what we have been told. So we really don't know. I mean, I really don't know how the government is planning to roll this out. Policy तो अभी उनका सिर्फ intent बताती है, action plan नहीं आया है. धीरे धीरे आएगा, हो रही हैं चर्चाएं, हो रही हैं, committees बन गई हैं. I'm sure आएगा, तो तब देखना पड़ेगा कैसे वो.
I think here then the next question that Renu Sharma has raised might be of significance. She's asking that school, the 6% promise of GDP for school education, do you think government is actually in a position to take, budget this, given the crisis in the economy and the pandemic imposed constraints to the economy?
If you want an honest answer from me, I'll say no. The reason for that is, 6% GDP तो कोठारी कमीशन ने भी प्रपोज किया था, ये नया नहीं है, तब भी कभी नहीं मिला. न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी 86 की पॉलिसी में भी नहीं मिला कभी भी. 6% GDP का प्रॉमिस तब भी था, अब भी है. अभी तो आप कैसे एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं? पहले आपकी इकोनॉमिक रिकवरी होगी, उसके बाद फिर आप सोच सकते हैं. यहाँ तो एक सरकार की मजबूरी है, उन्होंने कहा है, लेकिन आप सोचिए कि जिस साल पॉलिसी निकलती उसी साल सब कुछ थोड़ी इम्प्लीमेंट होता है. मैंने बताया आपको ना, अमित खरे ने कहा 2030 तक उनका रोल आउट प्लान है. They have a longitudinal approach. Yeah.
Mr. Mukesh asks, here I think it might just fit in. He's asking if the government is withdrawing from its responsibilities in school education. And do you think इनकी संख्या, सरकारी स्कूलों की संख्या, टीचर्स की संख्या खत्म होती जा रही है, इतना केवल की प्लानिंग में क्या टीचर्स ट्रेनिंग की तैयारी है?
ये तो मैं अगर शिक्षा मंत्री होती तो मैं आपको ज्यादा कन्विक्शन से इसका जवाब देती, बट ये देखिए, ये मत भूलिए कि 90% बच्चे सरकारी तंत्र में पढ़ते हैं, और अगर इतनी बड़ी मात्रा में बच्चे सरकारी तंत्र में पढ़ेंगे तो गवर्नमेंट एंड फंडामेंटल राइट है शिक्षा, गवर्नमेंट अपनी जिम्मेदारी एब्डिकेट नहीं कर सकती है. अब आपने देखा होगा कि कम्युनिटीज जो हैं, विलेज कम्युनिटीज भी, वो बहुत बुलंद हो गई हैं, काफी बोलने लगी हैं, तो लोग अपना हक तो मांगेंगे. मुझे नहीं लगता है कि सरकार जो है इससे मुक्त हो सकती है, और नहीं हो सकती है, मजबूर रहेगी. अब वो किस मॉडल से करते हैं, क्योंकि ये जो PPP नुमा आया है, और अब ये पब्लिक फिलैंथ्रोपिक प्रैक्टिस हो गया है ना, पार्टनरशिप. ये पहले तो पब्लिक प्राइवेट पार्टनरशिप था, अब तो ये पब्लिक फिलैंथ्रोपिक पार्टनरशिप हो गया. ये एक अजीब नई प्रैक्टिस आ गई है. अब फिलैंथ्रोपर क्या उसको ओन करना शुरू कर देगा, ये सब हमें कुछ पता नहीं है अभी. वी हैव टू वेट फॉर द इम्प्लीमेंटेशन प्लान. Actually, I don't know. I don't want to share a personal opinion because that will not be right. I mean, I need to have a more informed view based on what emerges.
There are one comment and a query about medium of instruction. This question is about which is the stage wherein mother tongue education will be implemented, and the other question is about mother tongue and regional languages have been given preference in early 5 to 8 years of education, doesn't it affect communication of skill of students in higher classes as compared to English medium students? And again, there's another question. There is a comment about which may be related, that there is a linguistic and cultural hierarchy in India. How our pluralistic nature can be maintained?
Yeah,
maintaining equality.
Yeah, that's a very important question, and I mean, I talked about that. So I don't think children should be the, you know, the sort of harbingers of maintaining that all the languages should flourish. There are other ways. And there's a whole section in the policy which talks about promoting languages, modern Indian languages and tribal languages, etc. There's a whole section, and there are other ways of doing it. So, but I don't think by enforcing or by compelling children to study in the vernacular medium or the home language for such a long period of time, we should be thrusting a point of view on them. You know, in any case, जब बच्चे स्कूल जाते, दिल्ली में जो बच्चे स्कूल जाते सब हिंदी बोलते हैं बच्चे, और धीरे धीरे हिंदी बोलते बोलते अंग्रेजी के शब्द आते, फिर खिचड़ी बोलते हैं, कुछ शब्द हिंदी कुछ शब्द अंग्रेजी के मिक्स करके, बिकॉज भाषा इज फॉर कम्युनिकेशन, एंड देन हिंदी ढंग से बोलने लगते हैं और इंग्लिश ढंग से बोलने लगते हैं. It's a gradual process. It's part of their developmental maturation. By the time the child is 7, the child is capable of a vocabulary of 1 lakh words. The brain capacity expands to that extent. So that can be distributed across 2 languages or distributed across 3 languages. That's another matter. So there is a hierarchy. भाषा की hierarchy हर जगह होती है. आप किसी भी देश में जाइए, इतनी भाषाएं नहीं हैं, बट जहाँ भी, जैसे इंग्लैंड को अगर हम देखें, इंग्लैंड का मैं इसलिए उदाहरण ले रही हूँ कि इंग्लैंड की बहुत स्टडीज छपती हैं भाषा के संदर्भ में. तो वहाँ पे आपका जो है एक क्लासिकल इंग्लिश है, और एक जो है आपका कॉकनी है, जो एक कल्चरल यू नो डायलेक्ट कह सकते हैं ऑफ इंग्लिश है. सो जो क्लासिकल इंग्लिश स्पीकर्स हैं, दे लुक डाउन अपॉन द कॉकनी स्पीकर्स. ठीक है. और इंग्लैंड में ही, इफ यू लुक एट द होल यूनाइटेड किंगडम, so people who are in say Edinburgh, etc., they speak a completely different kind of English. Similarly, if you go to France, North France speaks something, South France speaks something. तो अलग अलग ये प्रॉब्लम हर देश में होती है, एंड भाषा का कोई सोल्यूशन नहीं दिखता है सामने. बट इस पॉलिसी में भी 3 लैंग्वेज फॉर्मूला तो प्रमोट हुआ ही है, वो तो क्लासिकली प्रमोट हुआ है. और इसमें, बट उन 3 लैंग्वेजेस में it's 3 Indian languages which they are trying to promote. That's the difference.
There is a question on the on examinations that are there and the kind of pressure that it creates. I'll add my question also to this. I mean, in terms of, it appears as if there will be examinations after class 3, after class 5. So the thing is, with this, what will be the implications of this? I mean, so what is the? I mean, my question, adding to the questions on examination, is wouldn't it have an implication in terms of how children are going to live their lives?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, this has been raised by all the experts in evaluation and in early childhood, that if you're going to put these pressures, transition pressures, and, you know, having to prove that you've mastered whatever outcomes are envisaged at the end of each stage, then, you know, you're again creating stress and anxiety for the child, and you're creating a different kind of puppet. अभी एक तरह का puppet है, अभी तो कठपुतली का नाच एक तरह का है, उसके बाद कठपुतली का नाच जो होगा वो बड़ा segmented नाच होगा at different levels. So how this assess, and on the other hand, you are telling teachers that assessment is for learning. It is assessment for learning, not assessment to actually evaluate learning. ये concept ही बदला है आपने teacher development और teacher training programs में. So the sociology of the child is very important, और फिर आप assessment जो है customize करेंगे to individual needs. So there are, Radhika, a lot of incongruences. There are a lot of incompatibilities which they have not thought through. अभी तो ये है कि रिसर्च ने हमें बताया लेट्स पुट दिस टुगेदर, बट शायद रोल आउट प्लान में ये सारी जो विडंबनाएं हैं, ये सब जो चैलेंजेस हैं, ये सब शायद एड्रेस हों. वी आर ऑल वेटिंग नाउ, वी आर एक्चुअली वेटिंग फॉर द डे द रोल आउट प्लान कम्स टू सी इफ, यू नो, सेंसिटिव एड्रेसिंग ऑफ इश्यूज is somewhere ironed out or combed out.
There are queries also about introducing mental health papers in teacher education, given the kind of scenario that is emerging. So, what is your opinion on that?
It is, mental health, whether you teach it as a separate paper or it's taught as part of the psychology courses and the psychology practicum. The point is that mental health has to be there. Teachers are counselors, whether they like it or not. So whether you have a separate paper or whether you make it part of the larger practicum of the teacher education courses, etc., it must figure in some way or the other.
We can just take one more question about
sure.
About the school complexes. In terms of what is your take on that? School complexes and vertical mobility.
Yeah. So, I don't know what to say. If you ask me, I would allow diverse models to continue because I feel that the context and the local needs and the possibilities in a hamlet or a habitation should actually determine what happens. In cities, you can have enforcements of different kinds because cities are built up like that. And cities have a population, they have facilities, they have infrastructure, etc. But I think we should allow multiple models to continue as long as we have near equivalent outcomes. We can never have equivalent outcomes. It's fallacious to think we can have equivalent outcomes. But as long as we give the opportunities to all, and we do have stories of mobility where people come from rural India to urban India, and there's a reverse mobility happening now, that people are actually studying in urban India, completing courses and going back to rural India for their jobs and for their level of satisfaction. So I think the story is a two-sided story.
There are more questions and comments. There's one comment also about vocationalization of education, and but I think you've already dealt with it in terms of the social justice implications of it. This has been a really engaging session in terms of the kind of questions that you've raised, the layers and complexities within which the policy is unfolding. And I'm sure it has left many, many questions for us to think about. I'm sure at some other time, maybe if there is a longer time to engage with these questions, maybe we would have you again to talk about it. Thank you very much for it. I'm not going to summarize because this has been a really extensive and it has explored many dimensions of the school education system. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, everybody. I enjoyed being with all of you. But I hope, your minds have opened and you'll all think now, because we're all teachers at the end of the day. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
I'll now invite Dr. Ravneet Kaur. Would you like to make some remarks about or some vote of thanks?
Obviously feel very, very privileged to be part of this entire
Ravneet, you're very soft. You're very soft. Yeah, come closer to your speaker. Yeah.
I'm very, very privileged that I've been part of this whole discussion. And I'm sure all of us will put our thinking hats of an activist even more to think about everything that is happening around us. And we are very, very thankful to you for leading us into this enlightened path. And on behalf of Mapasundari College and Hari Singh Gaur University from Sagar, I want to really thank you for being part of this whole exercise that we are undertaking. Thanks a lot, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you,
Dr. Lokesh, would you like to?
नहीं, thank you, ma'am. Thank you. आपने मुझे रिकॉग्नाइज किया, इसके लिए सबसे पहले थैंक यू.
आप भी JNU के हैं ना, डॉक्टर लोकेश?
हाँ जी मैम, पक्का.
तो हम JNU वाले तो पहचानते ही, राधिका भी है JNU की, है ना?
हाँ जी मैम,
हम
एक
सब
लाइन
तो पहचान ही लेते एक दूसरे को, है ना?
हाँ जी, बिल्कुल. मैं आपसे मिला था विकास के सेमिनार में.
जी, मुझे अब याद आ रहा है, बिल्कुल मुझे याद आ रहा है, डॉक्टर लोकेश याद आ रहा है. थैंक यू. बाय.